YouTubers, it's Fortune Cookie 45 LC coming to you from the Hot Lead Zone, and tonight's discussion is on powder measures in general and the RCBS Uni-Flow powder measure in specific. So we reloaders, whether we're new or whether we're well experienced, we like to use powder measures because it speeds up our reloading. And they're very enjoyable to use, especially when they're accurate. Well, this one here, the RCBS Uni-Flow, I've been using this powder measure for 40 years, and it's still going strong. So you might even say that a measure like this is a lifetime investment. But all the companies make these, right? Like Hornady, Redding, Lyman, they all make these powder measures. So which one do we get? You might study the reviews and you'll find out that there's good reviews and bad reviews on every powder measure. And price is not the solution because you can spend $200 on a real fine Redding powder measure, but there'll be some reloaders who will give it a negative review. So do you take a chance and get that one or not? Well, here's some things to think about when you're looking at powder measures. So I like to recommend that you get a powder measure that's really well made. Cast iron body, steel rotors, steel parts, steel measuring chamber, all this kind of thing. Plastic hopper can't help that, but that's fine. So what is it about powder measures that makes one better than another? And the answer is every powder measure is good and every powder measure is bad. It all depends on the operator. Consistent technique in the use of a powder measure is the key to getting accurate charges thrown. Whether you use a finely fitted Redding that costs $200 or one that has a little more tolerances in it, like the Hornady or the RCBS or a Lyman, but they'll work fine if the operator is consistent with the technique. So let's go over that. So you see, YouTubers, right here is the moment of truth. When we're dealing with spherical powders, no problem. The spherical powder will slide right through there, and any powder measure will work well with spherical powders, or almost all of them. The problem is when we're using the stick type rifle powders that actually look like little cylinders. And when those go into the measuring chamber here, no problem, they go in the measuring chamber just fine. But right here, when you get right to that point, right here, they start to bind. And some of those sticks actually wind up getting cut. And so you'll get a very inconsistent feel when you do the powder measure stroke. And then we'll wonder, well, did we get a good charge, or is it variations of stickiness in the strokes so that we don't feel confident that we're getting a good charge? And all powder measures suffer from having problems with the stick powders, whether you have a finely fitted Redding or whether you have a little looser tolerance RCBS, which is actually not that bad, or a Hornady. You see, you can't have this fitted so tightly that it'll bind. You have to have freedom of movement of that rotor. So there's a kind of a fine line there on how finely fitted you can make that to get a real nice feel of the rotor movement, but yet not have it bind. Well, I found the RCBS to be fine for 40 years. So what do you do about this problem where the powder has to be cut in the stick type powders? So that's where operator technique and consistency of technique is critical. Now, some reloaders like to have the rotor turned this way with the measuring cylinder on this side. And what they'll do is they'll go down to load powder into the chamber, and then they'll make an upstroke to cut the powder charge off and have it dispense. And that's fine, you can do that nicely, but I found that for myself, I like to load the chamber on the upstroke, so the chamber gets the powder going in on the upstroke. And then when I want to dispense and have the powder come out the bottom, I make a downstroke. And this is where I'm cutting that powder off to make the downstroke. I find that for myself, I'm more consistent with a good downstroke than I am with a good upstroke. So, it's like driving a standard transmission car. When you're doing stick type powders, what happens is you'll get right to about this point, and that's where the bind happens when the stick powders are getting to that small opening at the very end, and some of those sticks are actually getting cut. So this is like the friction point of a clutch on a standard transmission car. So as I'm coming right past that friction point, I make sure I give it a little acceleration to cut those stick grains off and then dispense the powder. So it's like this. Powder goes up, goes into the chamber, and then as I'm dispensing the powder, I come down and give it a little acceleration right there, and that gives me a more consistent feel when I'm dispensing those stick type powders. And if we can get consistent feel, that's going to give us a more consistent throw of powder and less variation in weight. So YouTubers, even though we develop a consistent technique and operation of our powder measure, we still might have some problems with stick powders that cause us to not trust the thrown charges. So we still go back and verify with our balance beam scale or electronic scale. And certainly that still works today. But the companies like RCBS and Hornady and others realize this problem, and what they've done is they've taken this powder measure and the electronic scale, and they've combined them now in various units that allow charges to be weighed as they're being dispensed without us having to do all the handling of the powder. But those are fairly expensive units. We'll do a YouTube video on those one of these days. But for now, this system still works for us very well. YouTubers out there, see you in the next video. Bye for now.